Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon. This is John Suntress with a few show notes. Trying to make the best of this situation as we all are, and I know you are as well. Thank you for downloading the show. I will try to be your companion and give you some hours of distraction with good entertainment, great conversations with a lot of new people and old returning guests as well. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you have questions or comments about the show, you can email me, john@wordballoon.com. Make sure you follow me on all the social networks, Facebook, John Suntress, Twitter, @JohnWordBalloon, Instagram, WordBalloon. I have my YouTube Word Balloon channel, and I've been doing a bit more video. I hope you will check it out and subscribe and like the videos or dislike the videos, but get involved in some of these live streaming conversations that I'll be having in the days and weeks ahead. Maybe one more spot, and then we'll get to the show. As always, thank you very much for your attention and patience. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. It's time for part 2 of this amazing conversation with Mike Gold. Mike, once again, was the DC marketing guy starting in the mid-'70s. And did a lot of work for them. Went on to First Comics in the early 80s and was one of the big editors there, working on books like John Sable Freelancer and Grimjack and Warp and American Flag, to name a few, The Badger with Mike Barron. Then he came back to DC as a group editor under Dick Giordano and helped shepherd some of the best books of the mid-'80s, the post-crisis era. Things like Legends, an amazing event comic that John Byrne drew, and The Flash, and Green Arrow, starting with the Longbow Hunters. Mike Grell's amazing thing that started with that prestige format and then moved on to the 10-year Mike Grell run on Green Arrow that really was a signature run. And as I say in the conversations, I think as Steve Amell got older, grew into the Mike Grell Green Arrow as the seasons progressed. You could say Legends was the inspiration for Legends of Tomorrow. And his Flash run under Mike Barron. Mike Barron was the writer, but that Flash run with Wally West as the Flash was a very significant thing. These are comics that I would say were more mature in their storytelling because they came out of that Dark Knight Watchmen period. They weren't grim and gritty. They were just good. And they were smarter. And I know as someone that was, in college and coming out of college when all this stuff was happening, I just felt like, wow, I'm really glad I'm still reading comics because now they're smarter than they used to be. There's a little more depth to them. The art got more interesting. And, Mike was a part of all that. So he's got great stories to share with you. And again, if you heard part 1, part 2 is equally entertaining. We go off on more tangents. We talk a bit about some comedy and other, things that, again, Mike was able to experience. He's kind of like that Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man, because Mike is filled with stories. And I'm telling you, when we get together and we sit down for a meal or at a convention after hours and we just kind of hang out and chat, I'm thrilled with Mike's stories. They're always entertaining, and I'm happy to share more of them with you in part 2 of my conversation with Mike Gold on today's Word Balloon. It's all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you greatly, League, for your support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. That's the place to go if you want to subscribe to Word Balloon. You don't have to subscribe. I want as many people out there to listen to Word Balloon and appreciate it, especially during this tough time. And I also know that this is a tough financial time for a lot of people as well. So I don't ask any people to spend money that they don't have. If you can swing it, if you enjoy Word Balloon and the kind of entertainment I try to bring to you every week here, you notice I've been doubling and tripling the Word Balloon output really since the virus began. And I'm happy to do that because we're all sitting around, and it's a chance for us to talk and provide great entertainment for you. So if you like what you're hearing, and if you can swing $1 a month or the price of a comic book a month, consider subscribing to Word Balloon, patreon.com/wordballoon. Also consider picking up a book from Aftershock Comics. Now, I know that the comic industry is on pause. Another reason why it's easier for me to talk to some of these people right now. Aftershock is there for you beyond your regular books. Why don't you pick up a graphic novel from Aftershock Comics and check things out? They have got great genre-bending ideas from some of the top names in comic books, from Cullen Bunn and Tim Seeley to Paul Jenkins and Brian Azzarello and Marguerite Bennett and Stephanie Phillips, Phil Hester, so many of my friends that are in the business just churning out excellent product under the Aftershock banner that is worthy of your attention. And you will find great books and great ideas from Aftershock Comics. Don't take my word for it. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, art preview pages, and the way to order these books digitally at AftershockComics.com. Okay, let's get into it now. Part 2 of my conversation with Mike Gold. Right at the beginning, we talked about him leaving First Comics and coming back to DC and being the group editor in front of all of these amazing books that came out in the mid-'80s at DC. He took a lot of his First Comics creators with him, and some very seminal books happened during Mike Gold's time as a group editor from DC. We also talk about a lot of other entertainment and, interesting ideas and things that happened during Mike's life, frankly. He's had a very interesting life and has gone into a lot of interesting directions. So, and he's been a very good, dare I say, mentor to me. As I say at the end of the conversation, I had a real crossroads period about 4 years ago. I'm at another crossroads period now. And Mike was very encouraging and a big supporter of Word Balloon, and he provided an outside perspective. And it was great to hear from an industry guy say, you got something here. Don't take it for granted. Maybe fan the flame a little bit more. I think you can develop this and make it into something even bigger. That was Mike Gold back then, and this is Mike Gold right now. Part 2 on today's Word Balloon. So what happened, did First continue without you? Because how did you get back to DC then after the first experience?
Well, the board of directors of First Comics, of which I was a member, we had there were 5 people on the board, and we had a lot of 3-2 votes, with me being part of the 2. On where the company should go and where our priorities should be. And, we were hurt pretty bad by the mergers of the different comics distributors. Back in those days, there were like a dozen different distributors, and some of them went out of business, and a lot of them didn't pay their bills. And, we had a severe cash flow problem. It would have been nice if we had more money to flow around anyway, but we were doing pretty good, but the money wasn't coming in on time. And I had this weird feeling that, if you don't pay the talent on time, or as close on time as humanly possible, you're going to lose your talent. And then you're going to get younger, newer people, which might be great fun, but you're not going to sell the way you did before. And ultimately, you're going to go out of business. And whereas you can cut a deal with the printers and the engravers and those types of people, because they're in business and they've got these presses, and they'll cut you a deal to keep your business. Freelancers can't afford to do that. We disagreed severely on that, after a while, after about a year, it drove me completely bug fuck. What happened was the business manager, who was the other vote in that 3-2 vote that happened every day, he left the company. He decided, he couldn't deal with that. He wanted to do other things. So I lost my only support there. And after a little bit, when I realized that Sisyphus should have quit a long time ago, I did too. I took a leave of absence, and I went up to the border of upper Wisconsin and upper Michigan.
Okay.
Beautiful forests there. It was October. The leaves were changing. I spent 2 weeks just chilling out. I had this wonderful time. And I came home and back to Evanston, and my answering machine. Remember those answering machines? It's you kids out there. We had these things called cassette tapes, and they would record these messages that people would leave you. I had 7 job offers on that answering machine.
Wow.
And the first message was from Dick Giordano, who I love. And the last message was from Dick Giordano saying, "No, I mean it." So I took this offer from DC, and it was a wonderful offer. What happened was I came out. Dick and I had a long talk, and then Jeanette and Paul, we all talked. And I said, well, I have creative freedom pretty much over First. Why would I want to give that up? And Dick says, well, we can give you almost all of that creative freedom. He didn't bullshit me. He knew that I would take it to ends where, like Wasteland. But luckily I did it slowly. And he says, well, we'll let you have most of all of that creative freedom, and also we'll pay your people on time. And I says, oh, yeah, okay, you win. I got you. Fine. And I moved to Connecticut because Dick lived in Connecticut. He says, you don't want to move back to New York. And he was right, actually. I was now 38 years old or 36 years old, something like that. And New York was too expensive and too noisy.
Sure.
At that time. Today, New York is a totally different place. It has a whole set. I love being in New York. I miss not being in New York as I used to go in at least a couple times a month. But obviously I haven't gone anywhere near Manhattan for 2 months.
Sure, of course.
If not longer. Or near any of my neighbors' houses, for 2 months. Just like everybody else on Earth.
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah,
geez.
So I'm going to
talk
move
about that
to Mongo because it's safer in Mongo, and their leader there, being the Merciless, he's a better dude.
Well, so you moved back to Connecticut. Now you're in charge of how many books initially were you in charge of?
Thousands. It just didn't even make sense. I had a team of editors, really, really good people.
So were you a group editor then?
I was a group. I kind of created the concept of group editor. I just did it my way, and later on they said, "Oh, well, now you're a group editor." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you. You're not taking anybody." No. So okay, fine. Barbara Kiesel and Bob Greenberger, and really good people. Elliot Nagin. Oh, had a great time.
These were all your editors. These were all the people who worked under you. Go on.
I edited anywhere from maybe 6 to 10 projects at a time. Some of them were there for me to start and then turn over to one of the younger editors. At that time, all those people except Elliot was a younger editor, newer editor. And then we brought in people like Katie Name and folks like that, Brian from Chicago.
Who from Chicago?
Brian Augustine.
Oh, sure, of course.
And, I would hand off certain titles to them because it was already up and running, and that's how they can. There's no school that teaches you how to edit comics, mostly because our insane asylums are full. So that's how I did it. And my department was probably handling about 30 projects at any one time, about a third of which were under my direct influence one way or another, either as editor or as sort of a handoff editor. It worked out well. I'm pretty proud of the books we did. Green Arrow, Flash, wound up on TV. I'm the one who named Legends, and that's on TV. So it's not that I'm waiting for my check. I know I did it on staff. Still, it was nice. It was good.
Well, yeah, let's go. I mean, because, Legends was the first big post-crisis event. Am I right in that timing?
I actually started it while I was still in Chicago because Dick had such a hard time getting any other crisis sequels off the ground because everybody would interfere and everybody would be very protective of their characters. And he thought it would be better if I got the whole thing started far away from everybody else. So I put John on it. Now John's working for DC. And although he and Bob Greenberger had been talking about some projects. But so now I'm working with John, and Len Wein comes out to Chicago, and we're plotting the whole thing. And John Byrne, who had just moved from Evanston, he lived a few blocks away from me, we brought him in as the artist. So when I hit New York City in January 86, I Legends was already up and running.
Okay, and it's who was in the lineup again for Legends? What I remember too is in particular Cosmic Boy from the Legion being one of the key players. Yeah. But and the Demon, am I right about the Demon?
I don't recall.
Okay.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, man. Exactly. Forgive me for putting you on the spot.
No, not at all. You don't take responsibility for whatever living brain cells I missed.
You're doing good, Mike. What are you talking about, man? We're going back to the 60s and 70s. You're doing fine, man. It's cool. But all right. Well, the books I remember in particular that were under your run were Mike Grell doing first the Green Arrow Longbow Hunters miniseries, Suicide Squad, Hawk World with Tim Truman.
Well, actually, Suicide Squad was not mine. That was Bob Green. It was in my group.
That was Bob's. Interesting.
but it spun off from Legends.
Okay. Yes. And then that makes sense. Of course, that was the sequel from, or a sequel book coming out of Legends. All right. So what am I missing? Like I said, so Hawkworld though, correct about Hawkworld?
We did the Flash. We did. Wow. Why is my brain?
So wait. Let's hold on the Flash for a second. So that's when Wally West took over after Barry died, and William Messrs-Loeb and Mike Baron.
Mike Baron was the first writer when we actually had a storyline that was killed. I won't go into detail, but it bothered me. The publisher did not want to take that step into doing a story about AIDS. And
interesting.
And it's her prerogative as publisher. I'm not denying that. But we've been sort of leading up to that for that entire first year's run. So when that got spiked, I kind of left the project. I turned it over to Barbara Kiesel, who was in my group, and Bill Loebs. We brought Bill Loebs in as the writer because Mike didn't want to do it because his story
was killed. Yeah.
Was treated with disrespect.
Yeah,
and I understood that. I worked with Bill on the very beginning, but I didn't. In terms of conceptualizing where do we go from here, I filled on what we had been doing, just so he knew what was going on in our minds. And he and Barbara took it over from there. Butch Geis was the original artist.
Yes, of course.
Was the artist on my entire run. And I still respect and admire Butch's work like nobody's business.
Oh, he's a genius. Absolutely, man.
He did a cover for Dynamite, a couple of shadow covers that if he still has, and I ever make it to his house, he won't have.
I understand.
He won't have. I'll just steal it. That's all there is to it. Sorry.
I get it. No, I get it. That's so funny.
And I should point out that Jim Steranko lives near Tim Truman, and I never stopped off at Jim's place to steal his shadow work. So these are good covers.
What is it? Seriously, man. And and I'll say this, Gary Gianni on those great Dark Horse shadow books. Yeah. He was an amazing artist. And his brother, who sadly just passed away, Tom.
We had lunch like 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks.
I was talking to Hillary Barta on the phone, and he said the same. And you might have been at that lunch because,
yeah, it was it was. It hurt because I really got to know John better at that lunch than I ever had before. It was a smaller lunch. It was only 4 of us.
Yeah. No, Tom was a great guy, and he did a shadow sketch at a con, and it was just on his table for $50, and I'm like, going home with me, man. He's like, oh, that's great, thank you. And I'm like, dude, you're amazing. And yeah, I mean, Gary's the bigger name, and certainly in comic circles and stuff, but Tom was a wonderful fantasy artist as well, beautiful painter, and beautiful. So yeah, and it's just heartbreaking, man. No, he had his last few years of life were really, really rough.
They were. His website is still up, and I strongly encourage anybody who's not intimate with his work to get that way.
Thomas Gianni, did 2 N's, Gianni. ThomasGianni.com. He's we all miss him, and it was very recent, and it really does hurt. It was only a month ago.
It was a month ago. Yeah, it was a couple months after I saw him.
Yeah.
And of course, I am known as the angel of death.
Stop.
I am. Look, the checks don't bounce, okay?
So, all right. So, Legends, again, Flash. Talk about Green Arrow and Longbow Hunters, because that was the first big prestige format miniseries following Dark Knight.
It was the first one. In point of fact, after I talked Mike into it, and I'll get to that in a second, that's when Dark Knight started up. And when I saw the format, I said, "Oh, let's do Longbow this way." And Giordano thought that was a great idea, and Jeanette thought it was a great idea, and everybody thought it was a great idea. Mike didn't know what the hell I was talking about, but I was able to explain it to him enough so that he was able to wrap his mind around it, and he really took advantage of it like nobody's business. He really knew how to play into that format. I talked him into it rather simply because he was not getting along well, had not been getting along well with DC over the Warlord. When the DC implosion happened, Warlord retroactively became a bi-monthly title. Now, in order to make room on the schedule for that, they canceled Starslayer, which was originally going to be a DC project. And that's one of the projects I worked on with Ross Andrew. And so Starslayer gets shit canned.
Right.
Warlord becomes a monthly, retroactively. So Mike, who was never really intimate with the deadline, was now a couple of decades behind that deadline. So they decided to give him an inker to help him catch up. And they gave him Vinnie Colletta.
Oh, boy. Wow. There's two styles that absolutely don't go together.
No, Mike, for some reason, felt like he was being punished for the book, his creation, going monthly. And in point of fact, Mike came out to Chicago after this happened for we had these mini cons at the Pitt Congress Hotel.
Yes.
And he came in, we were doing like this 2-day mini con, and he came down from Wisconsin, and I say, "Mike, I got some news for you, but you got to promise me you won't embarrass me." I said, "I'm not going to embarrass you." And I said, "No, you got to promise." And he gets mad at me. He goes, "All right, I promise. I'm not going to embarrass you." I said, "Okay." Last night, Vinnie Colletta was arrested in a gambling raid. He was on his knees rolling dice. And Mike did a vertical leap twice his length. He's not the tallest guy in the world.
I was going to say small guy. Go on.
But it was very impressive. And it let out a whoop that would just make the entire state of Texas just shut up. You know? Wow! Like that. And I said, "I told you not to embarrass me." So that was pretty much what was going on. Mike finally got tired of this thing with Vinny. They kept on saying, no, you'll get caught up and everything will be fine. And he got caught up and nothing was fine. So he held back the next issue and inked it himself. I was not part of this. I was not with the company. Not part of this at all. And after that, the editorial director and the new publisher of DC, my friend Paul, said nothing favorable towards Mike. The two of them had a parting of the ways. And he had no intention of ever going back to DC. So when I told him that I was over there, he said, "Oh, that's too bad." I said, "Well, I got a project for you." And he says, "Yeah, I'm not going to do it."
Hold on 1 second, because I think I stepped on you, and I want to make this clear. So Mike, because when Paul got the publishing job, their falling out led to Mike saying, "I'll never work for DC again."
Right.
Go on.
Right. Well, it was because of that Warlord incident.
Right. Okay. Understood. Yes. And it was also, again, because I want to make sure I understood, it was a bi-monthly. They made it a monthly, and that gave Mike more pressure, and they put Vinny on the book and everything.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm being upfront here. I mean, it's not that Mike's diddling performance was pristine, but it wasn't 3 months later, whatever it wound up being, until they did this maneuver, which they didn't really, I don't think they had to do it that way, but they couldn't talk about it. It doesn't matter. It's ancient history. So I said, okay, well, I got a project for you. He says, well, I'm not going to do it. And I said, well, will you hear me out? And he said, yeah, I'll hear you out, but I'm not going to do it. And I said, okay, I want to revive Green Arrow. I want to do a Green Arrow series, a regular monthly series for his first time ever. I want to start it off with a mini series that you would draw, and after that you would just write the regular series, and do the covers and all, the stuff you enjoy doing. And he says, why me? And I said, well, you've done it before. You like the character. You're an archer. You know archery. You can bring verisimilitude to the series, a greater degree of verisimilitude. But more important, the way I envision this character, I envision him as an urban hunter. And Mike stopped. He said, urban hunter. And I go, yeah, that's the way I see him. Now, if you asked me, well, what do you mean by that? I would have been up Schitt's Creek. But I said, urban hunter. And he went, yeah, that works. I'm in.
Well, knowing Mike from the few conversations we've had, that makes sense. That's terrific, man. God damn, what a great run. Good Lord. Honestly, man. And again, I was already a fan of his art going back to his Legion years. Loved John Sable. Absolutely loved John Sable. And yeah, man, all of a sudden, alongside this older Batman, Ollie aged, at least it felt, in the comics, and suddenly was a slightly more mature version of himself.
Yeah, we had decided that Oliver was sort of the de facto oldest DC superhero working. Well, we never really enunciated that way, but that was our take on it. And because if you say so, then somebody's going to try to jump
sure.
in. So
Bob Rozakis is online too to tell us we're wrong. Absolutely.
yeah. So it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, Nelson was still alive, so
Oh no, I hope to talk to Bob soon. Absolutely, go on.
Yeah. So Bob's a good guy.
Great guy.
So, excuse me, I'm sorry.
No problem, buddy.
I lost where I was.
So making Ollie the oldest DCU character.
And the reason why I wanted him to be the oldest was because I wanted that Peter Pan thing to come out a little bit more blatantly. Because really, if you think about it, the superhero myth is a Peter Pan myth. And I thought Oliver was best suited for that. He was Green Arrow because he saw this need and he won't grow up.
I hear you. Yeah.
Yes. And that was the way Mike was playing him. So, I thought it was perfect. And it did turn out to be a match made in heaven. It was great for the character. We did, we did a couple spin-off miniseries and stuff, plus Black Canary that Mike didn't write, but was part of the whole thing. We did well over 100 issues. So
yeah.
It was a good run.
Oh, my God. Great run. Good Lord. The characters that he developed, Eddie Fry's, the CIA guy that he would run into, the dirty tricks guy. No, it was a smart adult in the best way, a mature comic in terms of its themes, not tits and a lot of violence, although there was a little bit of that, not tits per se. But yeah, I mean, it was, dude, again, and I mean, especially as someone of college age, and it was fantastic. It blew my mind.
Well, thank you. I still get some pushback from some folks who are upset about Black Canary's high heels.
Oh, Jesus.
Which we endeavored to change. And when Sarah Byam wrote the spinoff series, she got it down perfect because she knew what she was writing about. But up until then, it was like my response would be like, yeah, okay, but that's what Black Canaries always look like.
Right.
And by the way, people can't fly.
I know Wonder Woman had I've heard Wonder Woman fans, young and old, complain boots or high heels as well. But go on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, okay, it's comics, but I mean, I get the point, and it took me a little while to understand that the verisimilitude that I believe you have to maintain in storytelling was affecting a good percentage of our readership. They didn't buy it. So, therefore, we had to change it. Okay. We weren't getting it across. It doesn't matter right, wrong, or indifferent. And it is, I mean, yeah, in the real world, A, she couldn't run in those things.
Of course not.
B, she'd probably be kind of cold in those tights.
Yeah.
And C, this drop-dead gorgeous superhero who just walks on water. Come on, they're all superheroes.
Yes.
So you got to call it right. And if part of the audience looks at a certain element and says, that doesn't work, the very least you have to do, and it sometimes takes a while, is pay attention.
Sure. No, that's cool. That's fair. No, and I mean, what'd you think 30 years later when it's suddenly, the hottest show on the CW and spawns this entire universe? And, at first, it's interesting as it went on, Amell, as he got older, became kind of more and more like, that Grell kind of Green Arrow rather than that rebooted, too young Green Arrow, I thought initially.
He also learned how, I don't want to say to act, he was acting all the way, but he became a much better actor very quickly on that show.
Agreed.
You could, if you watch the first season, by the end of the first season, this guy had it. And by some point in the second season, you couldn't imagine anybody else doing it. He was terrific. And Mike was very involved in the initial production. That's not unusual these days. You may have seen Tony Isabella and Trevor Von Eden literally on Black Lightning, the last episode of the season, which I thought was really hilarious and very cool.
Yes.
And Mike was there. He was talking with everybody involved, and they consulted with him, and he provided some artwork for it, and he was brought in at the very beginning, at least for that first season. I'm not sure how much involvement he had after that. But that was a great thing. That was a nice thing. When we did the original Flash TV show, Bill,
John Wesley Shipp show from the early 90s.
Yeah, Bill and Brian Augustin and Bobby Greenberger and I were out there. We're out in Hollywood working on that show with those folks. That was a terrific experience. And as I said, I worked on the Superman movie and a few of the other movies. I spent 2 days with Christopher Reeve just discussing who Superman was, because he never read the comics as a kid, and he never saw the TV show. So for him, it was a blank slate, and that was wonderful. It was wonderful to be part of that, to having these discussions with him. And we're working with Dick Donner, who is one of the nicest guys on earth and one of the most gifted.
Yes, so, on both accounts, it comes through on his interviews, and that's Jeff Johns' mentor, and I know Jeff has told me so many great stories about working with Dick over the years, and just their kind of father-son relationship and everything.
One of these days, and I rarely see Jeff. We seem to be at opposite coasts, but one of these days, I got to tell him my experiences on that Superman movie. Excuse me. He would have. I think he'd enjoy that. I had such a wonderful time talking with him. Him and Mankiewicz. It was great.
I bet, man. Oh my God, Tom Mankiewicz, great writer, great James Bond writer, as well as fixing that Mario Puzo script. No disrespect meant to Puzo, but again, and I'm sure you might have read the original screenplay. I know Jeff has, and Jeff was telling me, and some of the stuff people already know that like he had a Kojak cameo happen, goofy stuff like that. It was more of a silly script as opposed to the, as you said, verisimilitude that I think Donner insisted on and Mankiewicz provided with his rewrites.
The game changer for our medium, for the entire comics medium, and the reason why Superman brought so much respect into the medium is because they took it seriously, because they played it for real, that movie. It was a very good movie for a wide variety of reasons, but the most important to me is the fact that they didn't play down to anybody.
I know what you mean. Yeah. It's great. And really Reeves' physical transformation as both characters, that wonderful scene where Lois is getting ready and she's off screen, and for a second he's thinking about revealing his identity. And all of a sudden he goes from slightly crouching as Clark, he's got the glasses on, he takes the glasses off, he looks like he grows 3 inches because he straightens up. And his voice suddenly drops, and Lois, I've got something to tell you. And then all of a sudden he decides, if we're not moving fast, we're going to miss the movie, or whatever they were doing. And It's great because that kind of physicality that Reeves brought to both sides of Superman. And truly, it continued even into that terrible Canon fourth movie. Again, back to what we were saying earlier, moments of good things, like we were talking about the Justice League movie. I don't know if we're talking on the air or off the air, but there's moments in Superman 4 where Christopher Reeve is still showing some great Clark and Superman moments.
Absolutely, and you even saw a little of that on his couple appearances on Smallville.
Yes, I love Dr. Swan. That was so great. Great that he could do that.
Absolutely. It was meaningful just to see that.
God, yes. Oh, what an episode.
Yeah, that's deep for me. That was just a very deep moment.
And they bring back the John Williams music, and it's just this wonderful, like, oh my God, now I know who I am. And it was playing on so many levels. You're just like, holy shit, look at this. Isn't this amazing?
It really worked. It worked beautifully.
And like you said, it stems back from that demand of realism that Donner and Mankiewicz needed. And, we give Miller and Go, I think that's how you say their names, the Smallville producers, and going for that kind of realism as well.
Yes, and really, when you talk about the CW and the CW DC work, that's where it started. And they know, and they pay tribute to that. So they're very respectful of all of their roots. Last time, that's not true, but I had this weird conversation during the Superman shoot with Christopher. He was on 57th Street, about 10 stories up, dangling from wires for about 3 hours. And my takeaway from that is, at some point I finally said, what if you have to go to the bathroom? And he says, do not say that word. The beautiful thing is when we were shooting out in out by the old New York Daily News building, which was the Daily Planet in those first movies.
Sure.
That's when the New York blackout happened. And nobody there knew it for about a half hour, it seemed, because, they had their own generators and they had the big spotlights up there so that, they could light the building for the night scenes. And there was this blackout, and we were 2 blocks from Times Square, and we didn't have a clue for a bit.
Wow.
Yeah, that was weird. That was really strange.
Jesus. Yeah. God. No, that's honestly, man. Well, again, this is something we should get back to in the future as far as delving into more Superman. Good stories about Superman the movie. That's great, man. God, I have to make a note to. Like I said, hopefully I'll be talking to Jeff in a week, and I will definitely bring that up. So. Too much. You're killing me, man. This is amazing. So what about Hawkworld?
Hawkworld was interesting. DC had tried to relaunch Hawkman hundreds of times.
Yes.
And the one thing I hasten to point out is that it wasn't even really successful during Julie's period when he did the first relaunch. They did a 3-issue tryout with that beautiful Joe Kubert art, and it didn't.
Who was writing that one?
Gardner Fox.
Gardner Fox. Interesting. Oh, you mean? No, wait a minute. Was that the original run, or is this?
This is like 1959.
Okay, yeah, the original run. Sure, of course. Oh no, that's the quintessential Silver Age stuff. Absolutely, but that wasn't successful.
Not terribly. They did a second 3-issue tryout, and that wasn't successful, although my guess is that it did better than the first, because the mandate came out to put in superhero features in all of the anthology books, and Julie decided to put Hawkman into Mystery in Space as a backup feature to Adam Strange, and then the two of them for about 5 or 6 issues, shared the book, and then they did this one wonderful crossover, and then Julie left the book. I think Julie did one more issue, and Carmine left a book with him to do Batman. They both left to do Batman.
Okay, yeah, Infantino, yeah.
Was a great artist, but Jack Schiff and his folks who were editing his team who were editing the book just didn't have a flair for it, and then they kind of merged it with the Atom later on. It never really was that successful. So Tim comes to me. I have this thing about, I was director of editorial development at that point in time, and he said, and Hawkman was on the list, and so I was kind of looking for something there. And Tim comes up to me and says, "Look, I want to do a tribute to Gar," meaning Gardner Fox.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a lot, and I'm still not 100% certain that it would be obvious that he was doing a tribute to Gardner. He was, and it's obvious when somebody tells you that, and you go back and read it. But at the time, it was very different, I thought. Beautiful. I mean, God, the artwork was brilliant.
Yes.
Go figure, he was trained by Joe Kubert, so we do have that sort of loop there.
Interesting.
Kike Alcatena was the inker. He was brilliant. It worked out very well. And it's sort of, it worked out well enough for us to actually do a Hawkworld series after that, which did fine, although after a bit, when John took over, after a bit, we changed the name to Hawkman because more people were familiar with that.
Sure. So wait, was Tim writing and drawing Hawkworld until John took over?
Yeah, he did the miniseries,
right?
Prestige 4-man series, and then Graham Nolan took over, drew it for Tim and John.
Oh, I forgot that Graham drew it. Okay, very cool. Yeah,
and Graham did some wonderful work on that too.
Oh God, yes.
Oddly enough, he was also a Kubert student. So
interesting. Yeah, that's crazy. Now, there were pages of Hawkworld or Hawkman, I'm not sure, in the inspiration for Munden's Bar, the Bucket of Suds, one of our favorite hangouts. And was that Tim art or was that Graham art?
That was Graham's. First of all, I missed the bucket, and I missed the Bucket of Suds for so many reasons, and you should just do a show about that.
No kidding, man. No lie. I'd get you, I would get John on, I would get several of my XRT buddies on, and you're right, because Joe, who ran the bucket, was like this amazing guru. Yeah. And like I said, I caught the tail end of it, so I really, I would be a student listening to your guys' stories.
We held a party there every year right before the Chicago Comic-Con. It was a small invitational party for about 40 people, but the people who would hang out there, let's remember, we have to be respectful to the audience. The people who hung out at this bar that did not have a sign in front of it saying Bucket of Suds or anything else. It had a doorbell that you had to ring.
Yep. You had to go downstairs to get into it. Yep.
And the people who hung out there were lawyers and poets and bikers and writers, and then the comics community.
Yep, and the DJs from XRT that were a block and a half away.
Block and a half away, and we wrote Charlie Meyerson into it. Charlie was one of the newsmen over at XRT at that time.
Absolutely, yes, indeed. I love Charlie.
Big comics fan.
Yes,
dear and close friend for decades. Every time I go into town, assuming I have time, which means convention not. He and now Charlie and Frankie Lee, who's a big science fiction and comics fan.
One of my best friends in radio, Frankie Lee. Absolutely.
One of the best guys on the planet.
Damn straight. Absolutely, man. I love that guy too. Absolutely. Even Tom Marker were my two favorite personalities at XRT, and got very close to both of them. They
both did wonderful shows. And,
yes.
And Frankie still does. He blew this whole retirement thing. He never figured out how to actually retire. Totally failed on that. He's doing weekends, and he does a couple of those nostalgia shows. It's great, and I listen to him.
Oh, sure. And, Tom,
I listen to him.
Tom does the same thing. And really, again, for younger listeners, this, XRT was this, really signature rock station, and you really felt the personalities were curating their shows, and they were responsible for the playlists of the music they were playing. And there were, really, Norm Weiner, another good friend and a good guy. He ran it. He had an iron fist on that format, but you did feel a flavor. There was wiggle room of 5 songs to choose from each time you'd play a song, and that's why they would have very distinct sounds to them. And as a kid, this was mind blowing. This is when radio still was vital and mattered. And I say that as someone, as we were talking off the air, who's getting a little tired of the merry-go-round, frankly, and the homogenization of radio. And XRT was one of those last holdouts into the 2000s that still had a very distinct sound because of its DJs, their knowledge of the music. And so they really were beyond DJs, radio hosts that you appreciated their taste.
I think the WXRT still is. It's nowhere near as strong for me as it used to be, but compared to the rest of radio, of broadcast radio, it still occupies that relative place.
Yes,
it's still absolutely worth listening to. It's on radio.com.
Yes.
But when you think about it, it's one of the old CBS stations, and the fact that they're doing what they're doing today for Entercom, which is now what CBS Radio used to be, is amazing to me.
I understand, and you're right.
And the next history of broadcast rock and roll is going to have a full chapter or two on Terry Hemmert alone.
Our morning person, yes, who was the great Beatle fan and a sweetheart of a lady and another good friend. I worked there for 9 years, and I feel so fortunate to have been a spear carrier, to put it in stage terms, to these great stars of XRT and become friends with them, and they are still my friends. And I get, there's a great music place in Berwyn called Fitzgerald's, and that's still a big XRT hangout. Yeah. And when they have their 4th of July music festival, that's usually reunion time for all my XRT friends. And we all get together, not only on-air people, but support people and sales people, because it was just this field of hipsters, but in the best sense of the word, not douchey hipsters, but really tastemakers. No, there's a modern phrase to describe the culture of XRT, and I'm so glad to have been a small part of it for 9 years.
God, yes, and I was actually hoping to get to Fitzgerald's this year, on the 4th.
Sure,
that's very much.
Yeah, probably not. You know what's great? Fitzgerald's is holding, much like a bunch of other venues, online events with their go-to bands. And I know I got an e-blast on a couple things. So, it's I hope they survive. I think they will for the virus and stuff. And, one of the best-kept secrets as far as a great music venue in, like you were saying, the collar towns around Chicago and stuff. Berwyn being one of them.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a quick story about Terry that I may have mentioned to you before, but that never stopped me. When I was at WGLD, I was doing weekend overnights, which is a lot like being Lamont Cranston. I mean, nobody sees you. And that was fine by me. But towards the end of that period, that's when Terry got her job as like the receptionist at WGLD.
Wow, I didn't know she worked there. That's fantastic. Go on.
And I never met her there.
Oh my God! Of course, because you're working weekend overnights.
Working weekend overnights. Yeah, that was funny.
Hilarious. You know, she and I are teaching at Columbia College this semester, and that is hilarious. And I haven't run into her, but I've run into a couple of her teaching assistants. And I'm like, oh, please let Terry know that, I wish her well and everything. No, she's amazing. She's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Enough said.
She most certainly is, and she most certainly deserves it.
Yeah.
One of the we both have many friends over at WXRT, so I'm not putting anybody down.
Oh no, of course not.
Terry is something else.
Yeah. No, she's a Chicago icon. She really is.
Plays such an important role in getting women involved in being disc jockeys. Before that, WXRT got a couple of the women from their original on-the-air crew from WSDM, which was
smack dab in the middle. SDM, absolutely. Go on.
Owned by the Chess Brothers at first.
Yes, that's right, from Chess Records, everybody. Cadillac Records, if you remember the movie, the great blues label of Chicago that had Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry and Howling Wolf and all these amazing people.
And Bo Diddley, come on.
And of course, the great Bo Diddley. Shame on me.
Yeah, Bo said about the Chess Brothers, he said, and Bo is an ordinary guy, but great. He said, Chess Brothers ripped us off less than anybody else.
Exactly.
That was great.
That movie, that Cadillac Records, pretty good movie. Pretty decent, for having that Hollywood fuzz to it, but pretty good. Pretty not bad.
Yeah, I'm a little annoyed at the way they handle the time framing, but other than that, it's a very good movie, and the story is legendary. But WSCM had this crew of all women disc jockeys playing jazz.
Yep.
And we don't think of that as a great moment in feminist broadcast history because they were referred to as the Den Bunnies. However, at least two of their disc jockeys got their start there and went on to XRT or GLD or XRT, and Linda Ellerby got her start there.
Yeah, the great newswoman of NBC. Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I think it's amazing you got to work with her. Patty Hayes, another great Chicago led rock female jock legend and stuff, started at STM. I know.
Yeah. It was a very important station, but we tend to cringe a little bit because, it was so much a product of the 60s. And I'm not talking about like the hippie 60s. I'm talking about like, Frank Sinatra 60s.
Okay. And that, I only remember it as a rock station. So I don't know its Cocktail Generation existence. I was too young. I didn't know about that.
Oh, sure. WVON, which the Chess Brothers also owned, was there to play the 45s, the blues stuff, the R&B stuff, rock and roll stuff. But SDM was there to play the jazz side of the catalog and, the harder blues side of the catalog that fits in with the jazz stuff. WVN was critical to me. My sister, as I mentioned, was 7 years older than me, and she listened to WVON. I grew up with rock and roll in the house before WLS went top 40 in 1960. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and VON, for people who don't know, was and still is an urban station. And like you said, their backbone was rhythm and blues. Got to meet the Iceman, Jerry Butler, back in the 90s, which was such a thrill. And some of the others that were important to the record scene of the 50s and 60s. And it just, honestly, Mike, there's another subject that needs to happen is like Chicago's importance to the music industry, and especially in that 60s, 70s period. Tom Joyner and all the great, JBC and all those. I mean, the Johnson Company, the company that makes products for African Americans for their hair and for makeup for women and stuff. They were a huge part of Soul Train. Soul Train, of course, originated in Chicago the first year and then moved to L.A. But that's the thing, man. Black Power in the 60s and 70s, Chicago was a massive, major hub for that. And I think it's a story that really hasn't been told properly.
It's a complicated story, and it's hard to tell without leaving major elements out. So a lot of people have to they'll do it, and then they hit their foreheads going like, "But I didn't do that." It's a big, big story. I can't wrap my head around the whole thing, but I've got a lot of obscure nooks and crannies as well. I worked with with Muhammad Ali and with.
For the Treasury edition of Superman versus Ali?
Yeah. Well,
let's talk about that if you don't mind.
Before that, I knew I met him. All right, I'll tell you the first time I met him was I was walking down 63rd Street. I was a teenager. He was heavyweight champion of the world, but he didn't always have an entourage around him, and I was walking one way from this restaurant towards the L at University Station, which is no longer there.
Right.
And he was walking out of his gym. And I'm this kid, right? And I go, You're Muhammad Ali. And he smiles and says, "Yes, I am." And we shook hands. It was the limpest handshake I ever. and it occurred to me, why? No. He presses for a living, man.
Well, exactly, man. He's got to protect his hands, absolutely. And it's time when he uses his hands, he's making millions, absolutely.
So back in the early 70s, early to mid 70s, I was working with a friend of mine who was an attorney, worked on juvenile rights legislation and the like. He was a very, very good man. And Ali's attorney was in the next door. Was in the suite next to my lawyers. So he and I are working really late one day, and I got to get home. Okay, fine. It's not far from the L. No, not a problem. I see the elevator doors closing when I leave the office, and in my mind, that's going to be the last elevator for the day. It's not going to work after this one. "Please hold the elevator," I shout. And this mob comes around out of the elevator and holds open the door. And I go in and I turn to thank the guy, and it's Muhammad Ali. Wow. And I swear to you, I did a double take. You're, and he had a big shit-eating grin. It was just beautiful. And it was my relationship with his attorney that allowed us to do some of the stunts, including one big one with Irv Kupps in it, that promoted the Superman versus Muhammad Ali book. So that all worked out well.
Irv Kupcinet, for people who don't know, great gossip columnist of Chicago in the tradition of Walter Winchell and Earl Wilson. And when newspaper columnists were, again, tastemakers, and the people that, read newspapers, they would read that to see, oh, Bill Cosby's in town. Hey, just caught Bob Newhart. Lenny Bruce just was arrested. I saw so-and-so, at the Pump Room tonight having cocktails with Lauren Bacall. Sinatra was in town. Irv was an incredible media force. The newspaper column was his main thing, but he also had a television show. He was on radio. He called Bears games with Jack Brickhouse. He was one of those great journalist titans, and again, one of those guys that I'm pleased I got to meet before he passed away. And I really, man, I am Forrest Gump. I have walked with titans, and it truly, and that's what I do. I really, because my friends are like, "God, you've met everybody," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fucking Forrest Gump." I don't know what happened, but Studs Terkel, another great Chicagoan that I got to hang out with and spend time with. Ali, I have my own Ali stories. I'll leave for another time. People on the air have heard those. But yeah, man, no, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
Well, Irv also played football, college football. It was a big college football.
That's cool. I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah. What kind of interesting promotional things did you do with Ali and Cup?
The lawyer and I had worked out this concept that Ali would do this press conference and he would talk about the book, but he would not talk about his upcoming fight, which was in like 3 or 4 weeks.
Leon Spinks, right?
Yeah. And he, the press conference, we had wall-to-wall humanity. I mean, Jeanette introduced Ali, but not a single camera was on her. The lights didn't go on until Ali parts of the microphone. And that was remarkable. Neil Adams and I had a conflict over that for a while because he wanted to be up there. And I said, "You're not going to film you, and we don't have the time." And okay, that was another thing. But we had worked this thing out, and all the questions, of course, are about the fight, the upcoming fight. And Ali says, "No, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about this, about Superman." Meanwhile, the head of publicity for Warner Brothers is in the room ordering me to put up a Superman the movie poster so that it would be in the shot. And I said, "No, we're not going to do that because we're here to sell comic books." Now, I knew what was going to happen next, but I didn't want to tell anybody because I didn't want word to get out. And he says, "Well, we really want to push this movie." And I said, we've never had an opportunity to sell comic books like this before. And Jeanette and Sal Harrison, who was president of the company, backed me, for which I will be forever grateful because I was whipped out on a limb there. And that's what happened. Ali refused to talk about the fight, did talk about the comic book, and on the front page of every newspaper in the known galaxy, maybe even other dimensions, the front page story was Ali does not talk. And you get to paragraph 2 where you look at the artwork with the story and there's our comic book in every newspaper in America.
Wow.
And the guy who I had stiffed from Warner Brothers called me up, said, "Oh, you did the right thing. That was perfect. That was great." And
that's awesome.
That was wonderful. Yeah, I know. That was just perfect. It's because not only did I go way out on a limb for this stunt, but it paid back for me. That was wonderful.
Was Don King at that stuff? Because I've seen. Am I right that I've seen photographs of Superman or of Ali? Of Ali holding the comic. And I thought I remember seeing King in some pictures with the comic book there. Am I right?
Yes, and he offered me a job. His handshake was like shaking hands with a man made of granite. And all I can think of is, keep on smiling, this guy's killed somebody.
Mike, 100%. Once again, another Titan I've walked with and even got to play with on the radio and imitate him to his face. What? And I will never forget those dead eyes. And he laughed and was really a good sport about it. Well, my goodness. I mean, it was really easy for me to slip into Don King. And he was not offended. He loved it. He started quoting Shakespeare to me. You got to do it this way. And I'm like, okay, absolutely. And it was a delight in sports radio, but I've been to enough fight promotions and seen him in action. And you're right, man. Gangster. Not your rap star gangster, real gangster. Manslaughter gangster, numbers runner gangster.
Yeah. Don
King is the real thing. And he's still alive, but not the force he once was in boxing, still hanging on. But, and I can only imagine because that's literally right when his ascent to really dominating the sport as a promoter and stuff was in that period when the Superman Ali book was out.
Well, Top Rank was also at that press.
Yes, Bob Arum, sure.
And Bob also offered me a job.
Jesus, man, that's hilarious. And again, another guy that I've hung out with. Oh, hey, how are you? We want to come work for us?
Yeah. You talk to him and you feel like you've just gone back in time.
Damon Runyon. Yeah, man. Again, my buddy John Saraceno, a great sports writer with long hair and a beard, And I remember in the early 90s, John would show up at a press conference, and he's like, oh, look, here he is, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Because he looked like Gary Oldman. And it was, Bob's hilarious. Bob, again, another guy in pushing 90, still a very big part of boxing and sharp as ever. Still knows exactly what he's doing.
How old was Bert Sugar when he died?
76, I want to say, around 2012 or 13.
Because he kind of looked like he was about 190.
Oh God! Well, Bert loved to drink and he smoked, and that's what killed him was the smoking. And oh God, man, we would go literally 24 hours in Vegas, and I'd be like, Bert, it's 5 a.m. I got to go to bed. Not me. I'm staying up. I got to be on Good Morning in America to promote this fight in 2 hours. I'm like, okay. I'm and I'm literally like 40 years younger. I'm like, all right, Bert, I'm gonna go to bed now. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
The best. Another guy that I really miss. Good friend.
Yeah. That was amazing, though. That was just amazing. So I'm glad you asked about the Superman Ali book. To bring it back a little bit towards comics, I do want to go on record as saying that I think that was some of Neil's finest artwork.
Totally.
It was a tough project to produce, and Neil was a little erratic in that he didn't quite follow, Denny's script like at all in places, and every page would come in at a different size. I mean, it was just weird.
Oh, the original art was on different art size pages and stuff?
Yeah.
Crazy.
But it was god-awful beautiful.
God, yes. Yes, indeed.
At the end of the day, the only thing that counts is the comic book, is the end product. And that was wonderful. And
do you have any stories regarding, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you have any stories regarding the cover? Because I know Kubert originally did the cover, and there were also a lot of celebrities that you guys wanted to represent on the cover that, said, no, I'm not interested in being on this cover.
Yeah, well, comics were lowbrow. But, Joe was the original artist, and I would have loved to have seen his stuff. And then Neil would have loved to have seen his stuff. And I mean, Neil's love for Joe and his work is probably exceeds mine. And what little he had done in order to show Ali's people was magnificent, but they didn't like it.
Interesting. Wow.
They didn't like it. And by the way, the next time you look at Neil's cover, I'm on it.
Oh, that's great, man. Hey, that's fantastic. And I know there's several DC creators that are on the cover. So yeah, that's cool. By the way, if people don't know, the Welcome Back Cotter cast is on the cover. Lucille Ball is on the cover. I know John Wayne is on the cover, but they put a mustache on him because he wasn't interested in being on the cover.
Right. I sat next to Steve Ross.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's awesome.
He's the guy who ran Warner Communications.
Yeah, the chairman of the board. Absolutely, man. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and also a man of interesting background. But nonetheless, I sat next to him at the Superman versus Muhammad Ali fight, and there's the evidence. When Neil and Denny went to Chicago to meet with Ali and
Herbert Muhammad,
and the whole group.
Ali's whole business entourage, sure.
Yeah, they got there. I don't want to say early. They went to their hotel. They got up, and the meeting wasn't until something like 2:00. So Neil says, let's go to the Art Institute. Now, the Art Institute of Chicago is one of the most magnificent art museums I've ever been to in my life, and I've been to a lot of them.
Yep.
And, I got a thing for Fabergé eggs, but still, it's a beautiful place.
Oh no, you don't have to sell the Art Institute on me, but yeah, you're right for the audience and stuff. Truly. World renowned, the Art Institute in Chicago.
And
yes.
Get there after the Blackhawks are in the finals, they'll put a Blackhawk helmet over the Lions in front of them.
Well, and the Lions' connection to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah,
that's that. And for people who don't know, they named the Turtles after the Lions. I believe the Lions represented on the Art Institute and stuff, and that's where the names came from. So, or is it the artists that themselves, like Leonardo, Donatello, and
it depends on who you ask.
There you go. Yeah, I got to get the story from Kevin Eastman or Peter Laird. I guess they'll tell me.
That's right. And I got it from Eastman. I will not reveal that. You play with that one. That's fun. That's fun. But those Lions go back to like about the second or third year the Art Institute was built, which was before the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
It's stunning. But Denny and Neil went to the Art Institute to kill some time. And as Denny told me, I've never discussed this with Neil, Denny said, yeah, and we went through the entire place, and Neil pointed out to me what was wrong with each and every item. Now, that might be an exaggeration, but that must have been some experience. Because at some point it's like, yeah, that's funny. And then after a while it's like, yeah, right. Let's go see Muhammad Ali now.
And I'm glad you mentioned Neil's, reverence for Joe, because that is one thing that I do appreciate about Neil, because Neil is his own biggest fan, and that's fine, because much like Muhammad Ali, Neil can back it up with the talent. Right. So I'm okay with him saying, guess what, I'm the best artist in this room. And it's like, yeah, you probably are. But I remember talking to him about people like Kubert, but also, and now I'm blanking like an idiot, the Brave and Bold artist, Jim Aparo.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I made the mistake of saying, his Batman was very similar to your Batman, Neil. And he's like, oh, no, not at all. Jim was his own man. He came before me. He's an excellent, spent like 5 minutes going, no, Jim is great and a signature artist, and I came after him, so you're wrong. And I'm like, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Thank you very much. That's cool. And yeah, it was great to see, because I know Jim was a guy I know only in his late 90s, or in the late 90s or early 2000s, when he went to a comic convention in San Diego for the first time. That's the first time he really felt love from the fans. And It kind of blew him away that he just didn't know how much he meant to us all, loving his Batman, Jim Aparo.
He never got out of Connecticut. I only saw him at the office once or twice. And a magnificent artist. A truly magnificent artist. I should point out that Neil was the only other person that I can think of to do a major NMEA story other than Joe. And Neil did it as a tribute to Joe. And
that's excellent. Wow, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Wow.
Neil and I only got into two major arguments that I remember. The first one was that Ali thing. But after that, that was the second one. The first one was he said that Frank Robbins, nobody bought his copies of Detective Comics, the ones that he drew. And I'm a huge Frank Robbins fan.
I love Frank Robbins.
Long list of people I'm a huge fan of, and Frank is very high on that list.
Oh, yeah.
So I dug out the sales figures. I brought Neil into the office, and I said, no, look, you see the sell-throughs, and again, as I said a couple hours ago, that's the only part that really counted when it came to newsstand distribution. The sell-throughs on the issues that Frank drew were actually 2 percentage points better than the issues that he drew. He's looking at the numbers, he's looking at the numbers, and he goes, oh, well, that's good. And he walks away. Just to segue into something else, because this has no form or shape. I was at a convention in Pittsburgh, and like 3 kids won the lottery or whatever to sit at the table with the pros. And the people who were sitting at that table were Len Wein and Marv Wolfman and Paul Levitz and Jim Shooter and me. Might have been 1 or 2 other folks. And we're asking these kids, like, well, what do you like? What do you don't like? And we're having a nice conversation. He says, well, you may disagree with me here, but I really hate Frank Robbins' art. And the other 2 good kids say, yeah, we really don't like Frank's art. I felt so sorry for them, because I knew what was going to happen next. everybody else on the table was going to turn on these kids and beat the ever-living metaphysical shit out of them. This is exactly what happened. And these poor kids just, they you know, well, you tell us what we think, you know, and we appreciate it and we respect that and we need to hear that stuff, but you're wrong.
You know, honestly, man, one of the first, within the first year of Word Balloon, Tim Bradstreet and I are talking about Frank Robbins. And I'm like, you know, on the surface, I kind of felt the same way. Although something in the back of my head kept me buying his Invaders comics. And I'm like, there's something in there, man. And I really think it might have been Marvel's paper production or whatever, because and I always appreciated him as a writer because he was an excellent Batman writer as well.
Absolutely.
But then I know a few years later I caught his Johnny Hazard comic strips reprinted in, I forget which soft cover, big sized, you know, things would reprint the strips, and it's like, oh my God. And it's, you know, you see the connection of that stuff that was 20 years earlier and his Invader stuff, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. Yeah. And I mean, and ever since then, I sing the praises of Frank Robbins, and I'm like, God. And like I said, there was just something in the back of my brain going, I'm going to keep buying this book. And it was certainly Roy's stories of the Invaders helped, but there was something about that art that I could not get out of my head. And like I said, then you see him in Johnny Hazard when it's totally him, and it's like, oh, that's beautiful stuff, man.
The drawback on that Invaders work, on all of Frank's work for artwork for Marvel, is that he didn't ink it himself.
That's what I figured, yeah.
And that is a mistake, because it would probably be faster if he inked it than he gave it to any other human being. And it would look better. But it's hard to fault, I'm assuming Roy was the editor, it's hard to fault him, because the guy who did ink a lot of that was Leonard Starr.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Another great comic strip genius.
Genius. Absolutely. And he got started in the comic books, did a lot of work for DC in the early 50s.
Wow.
Really, his studio was about a mile from where I live right now.
You know, I was going to ask, Mike, in Connecticut, I read Cullen Murphy's book, Cartoon County, and I love it. And are you in that same town or close enough to it?
Oh, yeah. The reason why I'm living in Connecticut is because when Dick suggested I move here instead of to New York, I said, well, you live in Connecticut. You just want to keep an eye on me? And he says, no. And he stops and he says, well, yeah, that too. But you like these old farts, and you should meet as many of them as you can while they're still alive.
Yeah, all the great comic strip people were living in this area of Connecticut. And for people listening, I've tried to get Cullen Murphy on the show because I'd love to talk to him about the book. The book's incredible. Cartoon County came out about 3 years ago, I want to say. And it is so great because it's his father, John Cullen Murphy, was a big comic strip artist, took over Prince Valiant from Hal Foster, and had his great, of course, I'm being a boxing fan myself, his great boxing strip, Big Ben Bolt. So Cullen grew up watching his dad and all these great, Mort Walker and Dick Brown, Beetle Bailey, Hagar the Horrible, all these guys doing these amazing comic strips. Didn't Kurt Swan also live there?
Kurt lived about a mile from me. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, all these amazing comic book and comic strip artists all living in the same town, and just the stories about taking photographs for each other for their strips to pose and whatever, and just the lifestyle and everything. It's fascinating. It's an excellent book.
Well, you mentioned Big Ben Bolt, which was a beautiful strip.
Yes.
And when John I think he got sick. I don't recall. Maybe it was just a vacation. Neil Adams filled in for him.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Neil, at his start, probably was an assistant there. I wouldn't be surprised. That seems to sit well in my memory. But I may have the timing wrong on this, but after he left to do Prince Valiant, King kept the strip alive for a while, and Joe Kubert drew it for a while. I think he was the first guy after Murphy to draw Big Ben Bald.
Wow.
And he these horizontal panels and just some beautiful stuff. Joe's done more work in newspapers than people tend to remember, because he did some fill-in stuff. You'd see it and you go, well, that's Joe Kubert, or it's the school. Now, I have this theory that Joe actually never had any children.
Adam and Andy will be a little surprised, but go on.
That is just a convenience, those names, because he just did all that work. That's all there is to it. And I've told that to his kids. I said, well, what, do you get a licensing fee or what? And they stopped talking to me. But still, it was Muriel and I were good friends.
Man, there's another big regret. I got to have a couple convention conversations with Joe, and my connection with him was I had interviewed for my high school radio station Norman Maurer, his great partner at St. John's, and all of the great 3D comics that they did, and also Norm's connection to the Three Stooges, that he was Moe's son-in-law and their business manager for like the last 15 years of their careers. Yeah. And it's before I really put the connection. I only knew Norman from his Three Stooges stuff. So, when I then met Joe, and I'm like, oh, if I knew then what I know now, I would have totally asked Norman about St. John's and the whole, 3D comics boom and bust. And of course I'd want to, I did get a few Three Stooges stories about him, because Joan, his wife, had Moe's daughter, had written her Three Stooges scrapbook. Yeah. And then that's why we had her be on our high school station and stuff. And they were very sweet, very, very sweet to come on.
That's really terrific. Wow.
So yeah,
I love that book of hers. And
oh yeah,
I never met Moe. I wish I did. Of course, I wish I did.
Oh yeah, man. Well, that's why I wanted Kubert's. I'm like, tell me about Moe. He goes, oh yeah, it was really interesting. He goes, very serious guy, for being a comedian, very serious guy. And that Farrelly Brothers Three Stooges movie had just come out, and I'm like, so what'd you think? And he goes, it was okay. He goes, they got the pacing of like how a Three Stooges comedy would work, and he said, it was, he goes, it's got its flaws. He said, but I appreciate the effort. He goes, I thought it was a good risk, and he goes, at least they tried. And he goes, they caught a little bit of the spirit of what they were doing. So
I think they did a pretty good job.
Yeah,
considered, absolutely. Do you know the stories about Archer St. John and his brother?
No, go for it. Why not?
Oh, the story. We would spend 3 more hours just talking about it.
I understand. I don't want to text you, Mike, so it's okay. We can save it for another day.
So I encourage you, and I encourage all you listeners out there, to Google Archer St. John and read the story about him and his brother. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I guarantee you it'll be worth your time.
Cool.
Absolutely fascinating. Even more so if you're into comics, which, if you think about it, why are you listening to the show if you're not?
I have a feeling they're here because of that, yes.
But if you're Chicagoan, even more so, it is a phenomenal story. You have to read it.
That's cool, man. No, I agree. And then all those 50s, Lev Gleason and all those guys that were part of the 50s comic scene, there's a lot of interesting skeletons in those closets and a lot of scandal and, again, an outlaw medium.
Well, let me tell you, it was not Bill Gaines that they were trying, that the industry was afraid of during the Wortham days. It was Lev Gleason.
Interesting. Crime doesn't pay.
Bill was going to cause problem, but Lev was a communist, as in member of CPUSA.
I've never heard that before. The guy who made Crime Does Not Pay, Crime Buster, the original Daredevil.
Yeah.
I never knew he was a communist. That's amazing.
And he was involved in many very far left-wing publications by the standards of that time.
Interesting.
And they were afraid that would get out, that one of these guys, it's the 1950s, one of these guys would do his research, which they didn't, and amazingly, and find out that this guy was a card-carrying commie.
Wow.
And John Goldwater, who I actually had this conversation with,
the current John Goldwater of Archie Comics.
No, the co-founder of Archie Comics.
Right. Go on. Okay, go on.
Yeah, I met him once at Archie Comics. Oddly enough, this is before he sued his son.
Yeah,
that's another story. But he had his own little office. He was there like once a week, and he happened to be there one time when I was there. And he and I just had about a 20-minute conversation. He was very brusque, a guy who was not happy about hardly anything. But he did talk about Lev Gleason when I asked him. I said, well, were you worried that they would find out the truth about Lev Gleason, or however I phrased it? And his eyes rolled. I mean, he was about 150 years old, so I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And he's the guy who wrote the Comics Code, the original Comics Code.
Right.
The one that Frank Miller tore up at the San Diego Comic-Con.
I've seen that video, yes. In
front of John's brother, who I was standing next to at the time. Yeah, I know.
The stories, man. Wow, that's amazing. Jesus. Were you, we just lost him in December, Victor Gorlick. Yeah. Were you friendly with Victor? Did you know Victor?
Yes. He and I served on a committee with, let me think, Mark Grunwald and Alan Harvey to rewrite the Comics Code.
Wow.
And we did rewrite the Comics Code, and then the Comics Code promptly ignored it, and then within about a year, everybody had quit. The publishers had quit.
Sure. Interesting.
But Victor and I, we knew each other pretty well. I mean, I hadn't seen him the last maybe 5 years of his life, but when they were doing a lot of conventions and he was still doing a lot of conventions, we'd renew our friendship. Loved the guy. He colored one of my favorite comic stories, which was written by Jerry Siegel. It was an issue of the Mighty Crusaders in the 1960s, like issue 4 and 5. And the story was called Too Many Heroes, where all of the MLJ characters, superheroes, all the costume characters met one another. And it wound up, and I have no idea if this was on purpose, but it wound up being a parody of Marvel in general, and what DC was trying to imitate, and why it never came on. So if you go back and read that story, on one level, it's very, very funny. Paul Reinman was the artist, and Jerry Siegel was the writer, and Victor was one of his early coloring jobs for Archie. And so when he passed, I actually whipped that one out and reread it in his honor. He was a good guy, great sense of humor. One of those thick New York accents that. Oh yeah. That was great. Great.
I lucked out and interviewed him the year that was the 40th anniversary of Sugar Sugar. And I'm like, I got to talk to Victor about this because I knew he was there when it happened and everything. And just how, game changing that was for Archie Comics. And God, I mean, I watched that cartoon, Everything's Archie, and all of that stuff. And I was the perfect age because, I mean, as I told Victor, I'm like, hey, man, I'm a member of the Archie fan club. I had my membership. I wish I could hung on to my membership card, but I certainly had it. And that was one of the coolest things ever to come through the mail to, this under 10-year-old kid that, was like, wow, I'm in the Archie club. That's amazing. Yeah, so that was, as opposed to being in FOOM, Friends of Old Marvel and, some of the other things. Yeah, I was an Archie guy.
Well, I still am. I remain a big fan of the 1940s and 50s Archie stories and some of the experimentation stuff they did in the late 50s and early 60s. I think that Bob Montana is one of the most underrated people, most ignored people in comics history.
Agreed.
He deserves to be right up there on that top 10 list. But he created Archie, so nobody thinks about him.
Right. No, Archie's. Go ahead.
That's just a shame.
Well, it's wrong. You're right, man. And that's truly, I have a lot of people that are aligned to modern Archie, like Mike Pellerito and Alex Segura. Right. And, they're the trustees now, and obviously worked with Victor and everything. Victor was really that last connection to those great decades. And I think Archie is always an afterthought, certainly in the direct market. And then, I remember a couple years ago that one of those rare times when Archie like pounded their fists on the table, because it's like, it was back when all the new comics were finally like breaking 100,000 again in the early 2000s, and it's like, we sell 250,000 Archies in supermarkets and newsstands still, and everywhere else that comics don't sell. But just thought we'd remind everybody, and it's like, yeah, that's right, because they're right for kids. And they're an impulse buy for mom when she's in line in the supermarket, and it worked forever. And truly, the revitalization of Archie, including people like we mentioned before, like Brian Augustin and everything. I mean, Al Milgrom over there, and
Paul
Kupperberg. He and I were just talking about the death of Archie and the life of Archie, the married life. All that stuff is fantastic, and I know, and certainly with the TV success too. Good Lord, good way to go, Archie.
Well, Kupperberg, of course, killed off Miss Grundy, so he's going to be smoking a turban for that.
The blood is on his hands. Yes,
the blood is on his hands. But it's the first time they've come close to being contemporary since about 1960. They're always sort of 10 or 15 years behind the reality. They were there in the 40s. And almost there in the 50s, and then they kind of lost their way. But they still did great stories. They were funny stories. They were clever stories. And by the way, I had mentioned that TV Guide bought that space for their at the checkout racks at the supermarkets. So did Archie.
Right. There you go. Yeah, man.
That space.
And it paid off. I mean, it was huge. Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, and it's. I mean. Absolutely, goddamn. I mean, and that's why I'm like, don't, like Newsarama, and I my friend, I used to be part of Newsarama, but I remember in the talkback they had like acknowledged some, like maybe it was Betty and Veronica number 275 or something. Well, why are we talking about Archie? And it's like, because Archie's a vital part of the comics community. I'm sorry you don't see it that way, but the real people that are the real players, it's like, yeah, Archie's pretty important, man. That great book, 10 Cent Archie. That looked at the 50s decade, I think, and maybe 50s and 60s. It's been a while since I read it, but oh god, yeah, man, I'm with you on Archie, man.
Archie has been in print, entertaining people every day since the early 40s. I mean, 41, 42.
Yep.
The only other characters you can say that about are Superman and Batman. I think it predates Wonder Woman, but we'll give you Wonder Woman.
Sure.
And Green Arrow and Aquaman. All the other characters either were interrupted or faded away.
Yeah. No, you're right about that. Well, and I love their success now with Riverdale and Sabrina on Netflix and Katie Keene now on CW. But it's like, during the golden age of radio, Archie was a sitcom for 10 years.
That's right.
It's like, this is nothing new for Archie breaking into mainstream media the way that it has currently on television. It's like, when radio was the thing and the only thing, Archie was right there on the radio every week as well. It's amazing.
And they had a couple of TV pilots.
Oh, yeah.
That didn't go very far. Weren't really great, in my opinion. But, they were pilots. They could have been.
Right.
And a lot of top-notch characters like Dick Tracy in the 50s and the Phantom in the 50s, they all had pilots. And Wonder Woman before Linda Carter. Right. That was a level. That was a step. And as you say, the show was on Bob Hastings.
Yes.
Who was a very, very gifted actor. That was on for a decade. I mean, it was wonderful. That was at a point in time when Superman was on, but the Batman pilot failed.
Right, the old radio Batman. Yes, indeed. Yep. No, it's funny. There's a syndicated show. I don't know if they play it out by you, but BBM plays it 5 nights a week at midnight when radio was. And every Wednesday they run an episode of the Superman serial. Yeah. And I remember a few months ago working an overnight at BBM, and it was when Batman and Robin were guest starring, and it was fantastic. Yeah, it was great.
It's on Sirius XM.
Oh, of course it is. Of course it is.
So and they have a whole old time radio channel.
Yes,
which is wonderful. I'm a huge Jack Benny fan.
Me too, man. No, great writing. Especially like the variety show versions are okay, but for me, it's the sitcom at home.
Oh, absolutely.
Behind the scenes of the show. We got to get the show ready, Rochester. Absolutely.
Oh, and Benny was such an influence. Johnny Carson was his protege.
Yes.
And Bill Maher got his entire sense of timing and his posture from Johnny Carson, and you can see Bill Maher today doing Jack Benny, whether he's doing it through that Johnny Carson filter or what. The supporting cast was unbelievable. The supporting cast was 10 times better than anybody else's in the history of broadcasting, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Dennis Day, funny as hell. Phil Harris, funny as hell.
Eddie Anderson.
Eddie Anderson, Rochester, absolutely. Great character, great actor, very great actor.
Mel Blanc and Frank Nelson.
Yes.
These are. And if you watch some of the old TV shows, you'll see Billy Mooney.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know Billy Mooney did a Benny. That's fantastic. Well, I do know Harry Shearer was on the radio show and on several of the early television episodes. And as an 8-year-old kid, there was a group of boys that were called the Beavers that were big Jack Benny fans. And Harry had like one of the main parts of the Beavers and stuff, which is hilarious. Harry Shearer from Spinal Tap. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. No, it truly is. I never met Harry. I wish I did. It would be great to talk to. But Billy and I have had some conversations about working with Jack Benny, and I'm envious as hell.
Oh God, yeah. Oh, I know that. Yeah.
When I got into radio, I did 3 things as my training. I did the improv classes that I mentioned. I listened to tapes of Burns and Allen, the radio show, for timing, for how to handle the job as a straight man. Because a broadcaster doing interviews and the like, you may have noticed, is acting in the role of the straight man.
Absolutely.
And then Jack Benny for everything.
Yeah.
For everything.
Well, great writing. I mean, all this Milt Josephberg writing for Jack Benny, and then 20 years later, he's writing All in the Family. You know, I mean, there's great writers that started in radio and then continued. Sheldon Leonard, the wonderful producer of Dick Van Dyke and I Spy, and then all these great '60s sitcoms and shows and stuff, was another character actor that showed up on Jack Benny, and he was a radio writer while he was an actor. Graduated as a producer and produced Danny Thomas's sitcom and all those great '60s shows, like I said, Andy Griffith and Dick Van Dyke.
Yeah. Oh my God, yes, I have ultimate respect for Sheldon Leonard, and yet I will stop the car and listen to him when he's on Jack Benny.
as the bookie that or the racetrack tout. Hey, bud.
Yeah, that was just brilliant. That was just brilliant.
Yeah. Did you ever see that clip of Carson when Benny and Blank are together and they do the CSI routine in front of Johnny Carson?
That was the last TV show Benny ever did. That was his last television.
Oh, yeah. Wow, you're right about I remember watching the clip and seeing the date and thinking the same thing, that it's like, Oh, he died a few months after that. Yeah.
That's right. And if you notice, Benny cracks up every time he did that routine with Mel Blanc, but that was the only time he forgot some of the dialogue, and Mel seamlessly covered.
Yes.
It was beautiful. I think we're going off into an area that nobody else.
No. You know, seriously, man, and I'm always happy about this. Half of my audience doesn't know, but are happy to learn, and the other half is like, "Oh yeah, I'm with you on that." I mean, and seriously, like Chris Somney, who's like 10 or 15 years younger than me at least, he appreciates the old stuff, and a lot of other younger writers and artists and stuff. And God, I just had Susan Eisenberg, animated Wonder Woman, the animated Amazon, as I like to say. We were just talking about old time radio because she's with a group in L.A. They are rewriting the suspense anthology show and kind of modernizing some of the old scripts. And we're doing new versions of the stories. And they're great. They're terrific.
I didn't know that. Well, I have a recommendation for all of you out there in the ether about Jack Benny. If you couldn't care less, or you're not familiar, or not as familiar as you'd like to be, there is this episode of the TV show, round 57, I think, that is the single funniest 25 minutes of television I have ever seen in my life, and arguably the funniest 25 minutes of life. And it stars Jack, of course, and his entire cast, including Mel Blanc, where they do the Seaside Sue routine, and Eddie Rochester and Frank Nelson, absolutely everybody. Billy Mooney's in it. The guest star is Louis Nye, great Louis Nye, who most people probably haven't heard of. This is a wonderful introduction to him. He plays the cab driver who is driving Jack Benny to the airport.
Yes,
and he refuses to leave. He hates saying goodbye, and the show is perfectly structured, perfectly written, has the entire support cast at that time, which was huge and god awful talented. It's on YouTube. Find it. It's called I forget the name of it now. Jack Benny and the cab driver, the crying cab driver.
Yes,
that's the crying cabbie. It is brilliant. It is worth it.
A more modern reference for Louis Nye, of all things, Curb Your Enthusiasm. He played Jeff Garland's dad, and until he passed away. Well, it was like his last great role it's so interesting, and I love that Larry David did this. Him and Shelley Berman, another great Chicago comedian, and he played Larry's dad. It's so great that those guys, before they were done, got one last turn at the table and stuff, and could still, another metaphor, hit the ball out of the park if they needed to. Funny as hell, both of them.
Let me tell you my Shelley Berman story.
Please. I love Shelley Berman.
And I'm not in it, but my father is. There was this movie theater called the Central Park.
Okay.
And it was on Roosevelt Road and Central Park, oddly enough, which is about, 3600 West, something like that. It was the first Belbin and Katz theater. They made these unbelievably beautiful movie cathedrals, but the Central Park was the first one to be air conditioned. They had air cooling, which was nothing like air conditioning. Air conditioning was, it's Chicago, it's August, you're in a fully crowded movie theater watching movies for 4 hours, and you're not the least bit warm. My dad grew up going to that movie theater. It was his favorite movie theater, to which I said, yeah, because it was air conditioned. He says, yeah, of course. Fine. It's his favorite movie theater. Well, in 1979, I discovered that theater, I'd just come back from New York. I discovered that the theater was still around. It still is today. It's a church. So I called up the pastor of the church and I said, my dad used to come here, and I'd like to take him. He doesn't even know the building's still there. I'd like to take him back there and show him around. And the pastor was just more than pleased. He jumped out of his skin. It was wonderful. So we go there at the appointed time, and he gives us this beautiful tour of what was the Central Park Theater. And the seats are still there. I'm sure they'd been at least reupholstered. The place was painted white, but it was still the same place. And my father, I swear, he was younger than I am now, which isn't hard. Most people are. But a tear came to his eyes. That's how moved he was by this experience. So when we were done, we walk out of the theater, out the front, and he turns and he says, "That's where the delicatessen was." And I said, "The delicatessen that where you bought all your candy and smuggled it into the theater?" And he says, "Yeah, that's it." And I said, "Well, you know who owned it?" And he says, "No, who?" I said, "The Berman family." And he says, "Well, yeah, it's a deli. It's a Jewish name. What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, there was this kid who worked there named Shelley. Worked for his parents." And he said, "Little Sheldon?" Which today is actually funnier than it was in 1979. If you think about it. Little Sheldon? Yeah. He was, making sandwiches at this deli next to this incredibly important, historically speaking, movie theater that my father grew up in. And that just totally collapsed his brain.
Sure.
Totally collapsed his brain. At that point, Earth ceased to exist. I helped him to the car.
Yeah, I don't know how, again, younger audiences may not know the name, but Shelley Berman, very important sketch comic of the 50s and 60s, right there with Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul and all these great comedians, and came out of Chicago, and a Bob Newhart rival who always felt Bob Newhart kind of stole his bit, although Bob Newhart is the first one to say, because they both did telephone bits, right. And Bob's like, Myron Cohen was doing it 40 years before we were on the scene. So I don't know where Shelley gets off saying that, but it was okay, whatever. And man, I remember hearing a couple of Shelley's final interviews, and he was still bitter about Newhart and stuff. And I just wanted to give Mike a fair farewell. And Mike, I'm really sorry. Do you really fast? Do you want to mention any current projects that you might have on the horizon? I mean, we didn't talk about your website, obviously. That a great comic site.
Oh, well, we're doing. I'm writing for 2 columns a week for Pop Culture, PopCultureSquad.com. Mondays is on Popular Culture. Thursdays is a screaming thing about political issues that are dear to my heart, like saving humanity, stuff like that. And I'm involved in 2 projects. One's publishing, one's media, and I can't talk about them.
Okay.
But I will be happy to talk about both as I can.
Well, that will be great in the future. Let me give you this wrap up. 4 years ago, I got let go from my regular radio job, and I had dinner with Mike, and this was in November of 2016, I think. And I'm like, man, I don't know. I'm not sure what I should do. Word Balloon is going great, but I really don't know. And you were the one to say, something, I understand. And if you get another radio job, that's great. But develop Word Balloon more, because you got something going here. And,
yeah.
and you saw that. And honestly, Mike, I took that to heart. And 4 years later, Word Balloon continues to grow. And as always, man, I thank you for your guidance and having that outside perspective of sizing up what I'm trying to do here and say, you're doing a lot more than you think you are, and you've got really great content. I think you got something that you should really fan the flame and try and make it bigger.
That's absolutely true. This is your show. You talk to all of these people and you make it work. So I am a fan.
Well, it's again, I truly, as a fan of your work for decades, it really does mean a lot that you're behind what I'm doing and happy to contribute and make it even better with these kinds of conversations. So continued success.
All right.
I wish you all the luck with the new projects. And clearly, we have a hell of a lot more to talk about. So maybe a couple months we'll reconvene and do a new talk.
That's fine, and I hope to get out to Chicago as soon as I can to see you and to hang out with our radio buddies. Maybe on the 4th of July, if the world becomes a better place by then. Let's all hope so.
Here's hoping, man. Absolutely. Thanks for hanging out today.
All right. Thanks.
There you go, Mike Gold. I should mention a little bit more about Pop Culture Squad because it's a great pop culture website that not only covers the comics world, but also television and film, sports. The great essay right now about WrestleMania last weekend and how strange it was and, impressions of that. Mike writes a lot of essays as well. It's a great pop culture website that deserves your attention that Mike has been curating for the last couple of years now, popculturesquad.com. And thanks to Mike for a great conversation and really for his friendship. It's a pleasure being friends with Mike Gold and hanging out with him when he comes to Chicago. And as you heard, I'm certainly looking forward to the day that the crisis is over, our own crisis on Earth Prime here. Getting back together with Mike and sharing some stories and everything. Always great talking to him, man. And you can count on more conversations with Mike in the future. I've done some video interviews with Mike. In fact, really fun one that we did with him and John Ostrander back at Wizard Chicago a few years ago. And I'm hoping I got to talk to John, check in with him, see how he's doing. I saw him do a good post the other day on Facebook. But I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mike Gold on today's Word Balloon. All brought to you by my friends with their domino masks firmly in place and their capes behind their backs, the League of Word Balloon listeners that have me, and they've got my back, and they've got your back too because they're supporting Word Balloon through their sponsorship, executive producing Word Balloon when you really think about it. And I thank them for that because this support via Patreon is coming at a tough time for me. And all they've done is respond positively. A lot of friends have upped their subscriptions to Word Balloon, and a lot of new subscribers as well. Word Balloon is free. I keep saying it because it is. You don't have to pay for Word Balloon. And I know how tough things are right now financially and how precarious it's going to be to restart the economy. If you're in a decent position and you can swing $1 a month and you like what you hear at Word Balloon, the price of a comic book a month, perhaps, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Word Balloon at patreon.com/wordballoon. But I thank you greatly because you've all really stepped up during this time for me, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Aftershock Comics is a great publisher with genre-bending ideas from some of the top names in comics, and they are coming to play with really great story concepts, graphic novels, ongoing books, that are already collected in story arcs that are waiting for you to experiment with and try something new. Aftershock's got a great back catalog that you should either be taking advantage of through your local comic shop or dealing with them directly. And I mean, the names say it all. Tim Seeley, Marguerite Bennett, Garth Ennis, Brian Azzarello, Paul Jenkins, Stephanie Phillips. Great new voices in comics like Stephanie, great old standbys like Paul Jenkins and Brian Azzarello and Garth Ennis. Of course, Marguerite Bennett, you can call her an old standby at this point. All contributing to Aftershock with something different. Not just superheroes, but again, great supernatural stories, great science fiction stories, great crime books like Ollie Masters' Killer Groove, one of my personal favorites of the last year. Don't take my word for it. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on how to order these books through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening today. I teased what's coming up this week at the end of part 1 of Mike Gold. If you didn't hear that, I'll give it to you right now. Right away, expect tomorrow a great conversation with Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp about their incredible Green Lantern run. Later in the week, we should be talking to Patrick Schumacher, the showrunner of the Harley Quinn animated show. I see that somebody's texting me right now with some more information. And I've got a few other things that are planned. I don't want to mention them until they happen. But more great conversations planned for this week and the whole month of April and into May. And hopefully this crisis won't last more than a couple more months. But Word Balloon's got you covered with entertainment and distractions to get you through your days. Thanks again for listening. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your attention as always. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2020. Stay safe and healthy.